it's very good at reflecting back at whatever the other person wants. So the beauty, the actual painful, paradoxical beauty of interacting with another human being is its kind of total unpredictability, and that you can't know what the other person is going to say.
In a human-to-human relationship, how much is what a patient perceives is actually a projection in their own mind, and how much does it really reflect something that really is going on between two embodied entities? And there's a lot of debate on that.
I'm Brandon Vaidyanathan, and this is Beauty at Work, the podcast that seeks to expand our understanding of beauty, what it is, how it works, and why it matters for the work we do. This season of the podcast is sponsored by Templeton Religion Trust and is focused on the beauty and burdens of innovation. Hey everybody, we are living through a moment in which some of the most fundamental questions about being human are being reopened, not just by philosophers, but by the technologies and institutions that increasingly mediate our relationships. As automation and AI and new forms of standardization reshape so much of our lives, we're pushed to ask, what forms of connection must never be outsourced to technology? And what happens to dignity and belonging and recognition when relational work becomes scripted and quantified and even displaced by better-than-nothing technological solutions? These concerns are increasingly touching a range of professions: teachers, therapists, chaplains, physicians, care workers, and really anyone whose work relies on genuine human presence. And they involve decisions being made right now about the future of work. My guests today offer two of the most compelling vantage points on these questions. Allison Pugh is Professor of Sociology at Johns Hopkins University and is the author of The Last Human Job, winner of the 2025 Best Book Award at the American Sociological Association. Her work shows how the pressures of automation and quantification and efficiency undermine what she calls connective labor, the profoundly human work of seeing another person and reflecting that seeing and that understanding back to them. Louis Kim spent decades leading innovation at Hewlett-Packard, most recently as vice president, and he now finds himself on a very different career path, preparing for work in hospice and palliative care. In parallel, he helps lead Vatican-sponsored conversations on principled AI in healthcare. In our conversation, we explore the fragile but essential space where technology meets connection. We ask where AI and new technologies can assist, what they distort, and what forms of encounter remain uniquely human. Let's get started. Hey, Allison. Hey, Louis. Thanks so much for joining us on the podcast. It's really such a pleasure to have you with us.
Thanks, Brandon. Hi, Allison.
Thanks, Brandon. Hi, Louis.
Great. Well, I thought this would be a really wonderful occasion to have a conversation on the relation between technology and connection. And the season of the podcast is focused on the beauty and burdens of innovation. And we're looking at a lot of innovations that are happening in relation to how we connect with each other, how we relate to each other. So that's one of the reasons I thought of bringing you both together and into this conversation. But before we go there, I want to ask you, as I do with all my podcast guests, to share a memory of profound beauty from your childhoods or your early lives that remains with you till today. It doesn't have to do with connection and relationship. It could, but any memory that comes to your minds. And perhaps, Louis, I'll start with you, and then Allison.
Photography. So my dad gave me a camera, I guess, in third grade. And then later I read books in photography, and there's still images I remember from those books. And I'm a photographer to this day. So,
do you have a particular image that stays with you, or a memory of taking a particular kind of photograph?
Yeah, there's a particular image in one of the books that was very geometrical. And the lesson of the book was that we stop seeing as adults. As children, we just see light and we don't attach labels and words to things. And then, as children, and as you grow older, you lose that ability. And so it was just a very simple scene, and it was still a lesson about seeing deeply.
Wow, great. Allison.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this, and, I grew up in New York City in a very large Catholic family. So the beauty that when you said beauty, I actually, there was the ocean or, that ballet class or something. But really, I was thinking about the kind of boisterous kind of climate of like our family dinners that were very ritualistic every night, very long, but that culminated in the kids all doing the dishes together to loud 1970s music
Yeah.
that I still remember and, cherish. So I
Wow.
think that it was a kind of, I want to say relational beauty, or I would say kind
Yeah.
of climate of beauty
Yeah.
of relating to each other and doing this thing together. Yeah.
Now, did you all get along at the time? Like, was the when you say boisterous, was it just the volume, or were there like tensions? I mean,
I
I ask because
mean,
I've got six kids, so it's
oh,
like
you
not a
do?
pleasant, yeah. So yeah, the constant bickering, the name calling,
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, there's plenty of stories. I remember there's one famous story of my oldest brother threw a knife at my oldest sister when there was a babysitter, or like I can
Wow.
remember them. And my next oldest sister and I used to have long fights that we would write long letters to each other about why the other person was wrong, so there's plenty of conflict, but also a lot of good times, camping, various things.
Well, I'm glad your memory of that environment is beautiful, and it's something I hope for my children. But presently,
Yeah.
it's not
I
something I
mean,
think
I
they would. Yeah.
still love doing the dishes with my siblings.
Wow.
And I did that with my own kids. We
Okay.
had a thing where the person who's in charge of the pans gets to pick the music. We had this
Ah.
whole this
Yeah.
whole culture that I 100% was just copying my own
Yeah.
parents, who were nowhere to be found. Like as soon as there was dishes
Yeah.
going on, they were somewhere else.
That's right. Yeah, I can. Yeah, that's what we do as well. So it's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about. I mean, so the focus of our conversation is this brilliant book, Allison, "The Last Human Job," on this concept of connective labor. But tell us how you got here, because your trajectory is pretty interesting. You started out as a journalist and then became a sociologist, and then now you're exploring this particular modality of connection and why it's at risk. Could you say a little bit about your trajectory and what led you to this book?
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, I think this book was the dissertation I should have written, even though
Hmm.
it took me 20 years to get there,
Well,
because it's what I really deeply care about. The kind of proximate cause, or the kind of immediate thing that led me there, was actually a fight that I was kind of embroiled in sociology, about the value of in-depth interviewing. So when I do an in-depth interview, which is how I do my research, it often involves kind of just sitting and trying to elicit the other person's truth through a kind of careful reflection of what I'm hearing, even if it's not what they're saying. So it's like,
hmm.
if I'm sensing some ambivalence or unhappiness or, something underneath what they're saying, I might name that thing. And then
Yeah.
it actually opens them up and opens up the experience. And I do think it is like a kind of profound seeing. And it
Hmm.
does affect me just as much as it affects them. And it's exhausting, but very rewarding also. And
Yeah.
after I was in this kind of embroiled in this intellectual conversation about like, what is the value of in-depth interviewing? And are we just getting people's rationalizations after the fact? I was like, no, this is a valuable experience. And then I was like, why is it valuable? And
Hmm.
also, how do I teach it to others? And how do I make it more systematic? How do I kind of scale it up, as the,
Hmm.
I don't know, Silicon Valley people would call it. So all those questions really led me to thinking more deeply about what kind of work that is. So
Hmm.
thinking about, seeing it kind of everywhere, seeing it in the hairdresser, seeing it, of course, in the therapist, but also
Yeah.
in, your kid's soccer coach, or just in your everyday life all over the place. So
Yeah.
in that, I basically embarked on a kind of journey of discovery of like, oh, look, underneath all these wildly disparate occupations, people are kind of doing this same thing, this
Hmm.
seeing the other, and kind of, I don't know, co-producing this truth between people. And I started to
Hmm.
think not just about that, but how do we systematize it? How do we scale it up? Is it possible? Do you ruin it? How
Right.
far can we go
Yeah.
down that path?
Yeah.
But you have to be able to teach it to others. It's not something that you can just automatically assume someone's going to be born doing well. So
Yeah.
anyway, those kind of tensions and questions were what sent me on this path.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that you've named it as the same sort of process that's happening for therapists and teachers and chaplains and in a lot of other contexts too. Right? And I think you say it's not necessarily always a positive thing; that it could be perhaps manipulative, right? And so it's
Sure.
not always just an authentic seeing of the other for the sake of the other. So yeah, the concept of connective labor, I think, is really generative for us to sort of explore across these domains. Lewis, could I ask you to share your own, perhaps your own trajectory and what drew you to and I think it's pretty rare to have a corporate career in a company for as long as you have at Hewlett Packard. I studied corporate professionals for a number of years and would find people switching from firm to firm very quickly, and that was almost an expectation that you would not really stick to one environment, and there's a sense of almost stagnation. If people stay one place too long, and so I'm curious as to what led you, first of all, to this field, to working in tech, and what your experience was like there, and what's led you now to switch to something very different in terms of committing your life to chaplaincy or hospice care, or that sort of very connective modality of valuing human dignity.
I'll keep the HP part shorter. I think it's probably the less interesting. But the quick answer for the longevity is a lot of different jobs, and a good part of the tenure was leading teams or businesses that I had created. So it's hard to leave. And I've been in 3 different cities, including international posting. So it was very different cultures and very different companies in some ways. As you referred to, I resigned from HP in August, and I'm currently enrolled at Duke Divinity in their MDiv program. And that decision was a culmination of about 4 or 5 years of discernment when I got exposed to end of life and palliative. Started volunteering for hospice about 2, 3 years ago. Of course, the MDiv sets you up for chaplaincy, so I'll be done in about 3 to 4 years. The more chaplains I meet, more I'm not as confident that that I may be cut out for, but it's something that's still drawing me as a calling. So, apologize,
Yeah,
by the way, if
yeah.
you hear a bell ringing. It's our well-trained dog trying to get out. So,
Yeah, no worries. Could you say a bit about what drew you to this field? Were there any people, any moments that sort of influenced you? Because it really is such a stark pivot for somebody in the corporate world to consider. And I'm wondering what might have been some pivotal influences for you.
my parents died when I was relatively young, so that was a formative experience in terms of dealing with death. And then about 3 or 4 years ago, I met Lydia Dugdale. I think you both know, who wrote The Lost Art of Dying. And so that book exposed me to the systemic issues around end of life and dying. And then I went through some hospice experiences with relatives, including being at the final breath of a very close relative. And it just, I just felt very grounded in those experiences. And the cause itself just felt large, unaddressed relative to other things I'd been exposed to. And, the choice inevitably, or just felt inevitable at some point. I guess that's the definition of a calling.
Yeah.
Maybe one last thing that was a formative experience is my father was killed in a car accident, and he was a parish priest. He became a priest after my mom died. And so at his funeral, his entire parish showed up. So it was over 1,200 people. And at the open casket ceremony the day before the funeral, my sister and I stood for 4 hours greeting well-wishers. And so I heard about 1,000 versions of condolences, and standing next to my dad's casket for 4 hours. So that shaped a lot of thoughts about accompaniment and what comments and gestures were helpful and which ones, maybe not so helpful, even though people all attended well. And so that was a very formative experience that shaped, how I view accompaniment. So, by the way, I've read Allison's book, so there's a lot of questions I have for her. One other thing I'll just mention is the last month I've been in Rome twice for some AI theology conferences on healthcare, and the topic that I've ended up converging in with regards to Catholic theology is what are the final roles of the human in the world of advancing AI? What are some of the criteria? And some of the things that we conversed on overlap with some of the things in Allison's book.
Yeah. Well, I definitely want to ask you about that and about your role at the Builders AI Forum and what's happening at the Vatican around these issues. Perhaps, Allison, could I ask you maybe to say a bit more about this concept of connective labor and its relation to this other term that maybe people might be a bit more familiar with, emotional labor. There's some sort of relationship, but it's not quite the same thing. And what in particular connective labor has to teach us about dignity, about belonging, and what is its relationship to those terms?
Yeah, thank you. And thanks, Lewis, for even reading it. I'm always gratified to hear about that. So connective labor in sociology, in academia, there are a lot of terms for kind of emotional type work of all kinds. So there's the term affective labor. There's all sorts, emotional labor, the emotional quotient, emotional intelligence, etc.
Right.
I thought that emotional labor is the big kahuna. It's the thing that maybe started all of this, written by Arlie Hochschild in, our first articles were like 1977, and then she came out with her very famous book, The Managed Heart, in 1983. And that captured the notion of, how when you have to control your emotions for a wage. And it was a powerful contribution because it was a way of capturing what felt different in service work compared to manufacturing. So in service work, she famously studied flight attendants. These are people who have to smile even when they don't want to. And using ethnography and extensive interviews, she kind of documented how alienated these flight attendants became from their very selves, and how kind of corrosive that was for their well-being. And of course, this is, offers beautiful analogy to service work of all kinds, where you're controlling how you might really feel, authentically feel, because you're being paid to do so. And you're controlling that so that the other person has a good experience, feels good,
Yeah.
Well, connective labor is pretty different from that, even though it involves emotional labor, controlling your emotions for sure.
Yeah.
So connective labor, as I define it, it really is about that reflecting the other process, that's seeing the other, the bearing witness to the other person. It's recognizing, acknowledging. I'm using all these words that many people have used in different ways. The other thing I want to say that is really important for me in this definition is that it's a two-way street. It's a kind of mutual moment of together. You are seeing the other and the other person feels seen. And if they don't feel seen, then it's actually not a successful moment of connective labor. So it's a two-way street, and it's really powerfully about this seeing. And the reason why there's a little emotional labor in it is because you may, feel you're a therapist at the VA, which I've spoken to many of them, and they are, they have a client who is suffering PTSD and has a lot of rage, and they may not feel all sorts of warmth and affection towards all this rage that's coming at them, but they are still engaged in a seeing project that offers some form of dignity to that other person, regardless of all the difficult emotion and problematic kind of persona that person is for them. So that kind of mutual process, that's connective labor.
Yeah.
Now, the reason why it's a little complicated, or probably depending on where your listeners are from, are they from academia? Are they just out there in the real world? It might be a little complicated because since, the word emotional labor, it's such a felicitous word. People have, since that writing, since 1983, really applied it to everything that involves emotions in the workplace.
Yeah.
So, and I'm actually pretty open to it. So if we want to call emotional labor that big, huge umbrella thing where it's just like anytime there's emotions in the workplace, that's what I'm doing. I don't mind saying connective labor is like kind of a version, like under the umbrella, one kind of emotional labor that is done. But I do want to separate it from that kind of emotion management perspective, which was so beautifully captured, originally in the 1983. So that's why it's a little complicated because the term itself has moved. And also it kind of is different depending on whether you're talking to a regular person, who reads The Atlantic or whatever, and an academic person.
Yeah, and I wonder if this is accurate or not, but it strikes me that one of the key differences might be the perhaps maybe a more performative element to emotional labor, and maybe less of a mutuality, right? It seems like what you're talking about is closer to Hartmut Rosa's notion of resonance, where there is something that affects you, and then you are affected by it, and that is a mutual interaction, which Rosa argues that you can't really kind of make it happen in some way. Like it either happens or doesn't, and you can certainly try. And it seems like that's what a good therapist is trying to do, is trying to make that connection happen, or a teacher who really, even like as a parent trying to, understand my child. Sometimes it just doesn't happen. Like, I try to say that, I'm hearing this, and they're like, no, that's not what I'm saying. And it just fails. It's not that mutual interaction. So I wonder if that mutuality then becomes really critical. But if so, it does seem like, as you say, sort of magic. This is a thing that there's a thing we can control, and I think we can't control.
That's interesting. And also, I do want to say one thing about the belonging and dignity part, which was part of your original question,
right.
because, as an academic, I get all excited about parsing with the definitions, but really the kind of crux of your question was about like, what is the role this has in belonging and dignity? Yeah. And that's the kind of end product, or the result of doing connective labor well. And the other thing is, as I mentioned at the outset, it's all around us. It's all over. It's your barista. It's your, kind of dry cleaner. Like there's all kinds of like mundane, low-level commerce, retail, or whatever interactions that can involve a momentary jewel of connecting, of seeing the other. And those kind of things build our little units of belonging that I think are very powerful for knitting us together as a community. And I have increasingly kind of come to think that this is the heart of everyday experience that we need to preserve. And so I'm really, I'm not just talking about these deeply meaningful relationships of the therapist or the teacher or the chaplain in the hospital or whatever. Yeah. So I'll stop there because I'm talking too much. But
that's very helpful. Yeah. It's not just the moments of profound encounter, but also the simple interactions with a checkout counter, person. Right. So, and why that's valuable. Louis, I'd love to know, I mean, in your experience of leadership in the corporate world, where this kind of connective labor has been manifested. Is it, is it important for leadership? Is that something that you've had to, either how have you experienced it as a giver or recipient of this mode of connection, and perhaps what are the challenges to this kind of connective labor in the corporate environment?
Well, some examples that come to mind is when a group or a job goes away and you have to inform either an individual or a team they're going to get laid off. So I had to do a lot of that. There are perfunctory ways to do it. There are scripts that you can follow, which are necessary when you're in an organization of 10, 20, 30,000 people. Over time, as I've gotten older, I've found myself to go maybe off script and just sort of be in the moment and avoid euphemisms. And I think an important element, something that I think Allison was referring to, is there's just a presence that is necessary. That's part of, I guess, honoring dignity with presence. Sometimes it's nonverbal, but it's just fully being there and ready to receive the moment, even when it's difficult. There's almost kind of an ontological, I don't know if that's the right word, but beyond just making the situation more useful or having a better outcome, there's just the fact that we're human and deserving of dignity requires a certain sort of state of being versus what you need to say to accomplish a certain task. So I don't know if the word is ontology, but it sort of transcends what you're trying to accomplish. So my corporate experience, I would say layoffs, kind of come closest to what I experienced volunteering for hospice side. Of course, it's very, very different, but, emotionally very, very charged moments. So,
I suppose it is a kind of death in some sense that you're dealing with, right? In that case.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
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 So I want to ask you about both of you about, one of the sources of pressure that, Allison, that you mentioned in your book, which is the increasing sort of pressure for scripting and checklists and quantification, right? So you've got these sort of twin pressures. One is to collect as much data as possible on all aspects of our human life, and then to have all of the scripts and checklists. And Louis, you were mentioning again, the kinds of, maybe there's scripts that are put into place so that people can manage those kinds of interactions more productively. And so this pressure to standardize it seems not just restricted to the corporate world. It's also, Allison, you open your book with talking about chaplains and how they're facing the need to see like prayer as a resource and family as a resource, and everything kind of becomes this sort of Heideggerian and framing, right? Everything is turned into kind of means to an end. I wonder, perhaps maybe Luce, I'll ask you if you've just from your experience, you've just started your MDiv, but are you already seeing some of this sort of pressure in the field of chaplaincy and in this field that you're venturing into? Do you see perhaps similar pressures to the corporate kind of pressure to script things, to manage things, to control things, to collect data, et cetera? Yeah, wondering if you're already seeing that.
Yes. I'm actually in my third semester at Duke. So I started last fall in a non-degree 2-semester certificate program in healthcare and theology. So, but 20 of my classmates, 22 were doctors. So I heard their stories of sort of the mechanization of their practice, and which is one of the reasons why they enrolled in this program. I also, at HP, was involved in developing some wearables for healthcare practitioners. I can listen to conversations and record them and transcribe them. It's a pretty common use case, but I got to hear, we did a lot of ethnographic interviews of healthcare practitioners, and, I think that, as Allison cited in her book, up to 3 or 4 hours can be spent on documentation, for insurance reimbursement. So, yes, I definitely see this creeping in.
Yeah. Allison, could you talk about what's driving that sort of pressure? And one of the areas I've seen it in this, in some cases it really seems necessary, as I've been doing research on Catholic priests, and since the clergy sex abuse crisis has been exposed, there has to be a lot of training put into place, a lot of institutional safeguards to prevent abuse, and so the kinds of documentation, the kinds of bureaucratic procedures that have to be put in place are it seems really necessary. They make it very challenging to do, for Catholic priests, for instance, to now actually do any kind of effective youth ministry. People argue that this is really, it's not possible because of the history of abuse. And so now with the new safeguards put into place, it really becomes very challenging to do the actual task of that kind of encounter that might be misperceived, or, you don't want to get into a situation where there's a lawsuit because you looked at somebody askance. And so there's a fear that is crept into place that impedes the actual tasks that they feel called to do. But I think there's a fear of lawsuits in a lot of fields. Medical professionals too, I think, sometimes feel the pressure to minimize some of their interactions and document more and interact less, etc. And so I'm just curious if you could give us a sense of what are the factors driving this sort of institutional challenges, I suppose, to connective labor, and which of these are necessary, which of these are helpful, and which of these are actually perhaps might be the kind of impediment that is leading us to say that therefore we need AI systems to take over or something.
Thank you. I also want to say parenthetically, Louis, I thought your description of just the sheer presence and the power of just being present with another person was just beautifully said. Just really great capture of what we're talking about. So thinking about kind of scripting and, data collection and the imperatives, that drive that, I see that, to me, there's 3 kind of drivers. The first is, I would say, a sheer or the kind of a growing dominance of kind of systems management thinking, stemming really, we'll say, from the Enlightenment, and just kind of how much can we kind of make this a controlled, objective process, and kind of putting that scientific objectivity, starting with, the factory and moving through emotional, humane, interpersonal service work like teaching or chaplaincy. That's a kind of historic trajectory that's everywhere. People feel the impact of, hairdressers telling me, I only have 22 minutes. They only give you 22 minutes. Even if it's a real interaction, I have to, look away from the mirror and I only have 22 minutes. That's stemming straight from this desire to control the uncontrollable. But what you're describing is what I would say is the second kind of imperative driving here, which is institutions trying to protect themselves.
Yeah.
And that's the, kind of adoption of, we'll just say, procedures, bureaucratic procedures that are almost, can also, not in all cases, but can certainly feel frequently performative, where you're kind of checking a box. Certainly in academia, we have a lot of like webinars we have to watch just to kind of say, can you effectively, manage a lab? And so you're watching some webinar for an hour, for half an hour, and checking a box that you had that training. And it kind of has very little to do with whether or not you can actually manage a lab. Those kind of performative box checking is something that's kind of across many bureaucracies. But there is this kind of third thing for which I have probably the most sympathy. And it kind of came out in what Lewis was saying earlier about, the scripts being useful when you're actually having to lay off people in a very large organization. Now, my sympathy is small here because I really like where he ended, which was, I try to not do that now.
Yeah.
What scripts do and the kind of, regimentation or systematization of these interactions, what that does is it controls the chaos that is the other person. And so if the other person, and when you're giving them bad news, they could respond in lots of different ways. And the worker is a person also. And they may be afraid of what someone else might do, including lawsuits, but also flying off the handle or whatever. And what systems do is they control, and this is what McDonald's coins, McDonald's invents or, is the apotheosis of, they control the consumer as well as the worker. The consumer knows where to go to put with their tray and all this stuff, we are controlled just as much as the worker is. And that's what kind of systems do. And in cases where, other people are unpredictable. And that's actually, for many practitioners who I've spoken to about this, teachers and therapists and doctors, that's actually the beautiful thing, because that's where true collaboration comes. You can't predict the other. So you're kind of waiting, listening, responding to in the moment. There's a beautiful spontaneity to that. So it's a beautiful part of being human and being in human interaction, but it is also potentially scary and threatening, and certainly to institutions. So that's why they're like putting in these different systems or scripts. But I want to just add finally that I really like what Lewis did. I think actually disarming the chaos, the threatening chaos of the other person, happens when you treat them like another human being. So if you kind of honor their presence, they are much more likely to be honored by that and to be calmer.
Yeah. Yeah, no, thanks, Allison. Yeah, I think your book is a really important call for personalization, right? And I think that word is being used now in a very different sense, which is, now sort of colonized by technology in ways that you call,
we need to fight that back.
Yeah, I think you call it customization, right? So it's not, there's no person.
Yes.
And so what it takes to personalize is a person. And I'm curious, maybe perhaps Lewis, if I could ask you, I mean, in your work in the AI space, have you seen, whether some of what's driving the development of various new AI tools is a desire to bring about the kind of control that Allison is talking about, for institutions to be able to control behavior scripts, et cetera, or even to provide a kind of non-judgmental sort of, I think about, I guess some of Allison's examples of, clients of a physician who may have felt judged by that physician because she was, intimating that they were obese, or, so is some of what's driving the development of AI tools to be able to provide a customized, judgment-free sort of interaction that can substitute for human encounter? Because it seems like there are a lot of these sort of, AI, antidotes to loneliness, let's say. And I'm just wondering what you've seen in that, working in that space, as to what's driving the development of some of these new technologies.
Well, it's hard to generalize. There's a lot of motives. I have been around companies that have chatbots. I've been around companies that have small robots for elder care, for people that are alone. I would say for sure, everyone's just trying to be effective. So there's no kind of insidious motive to, displace a human. They're just trying to be helpful. I think where there is debate and consternation is one of the themes in Allison's book. Will it promote replacing a human prematurely? Can you really replicate a human relationship, etc.? I think that on the issue of systemizing things, and I would say it's almost an academic point, a moot point. It's going to happen. It's an artifact of scale. I mean, there is so much depersonalization already in our world with industrialization that we just take for granted. I mean, we don't know where our food comes from or how our clothes are made. And within a particular organization, when you go from 10 to 1,000 to 10,000 to, whatever, you're going to see this depersonalization. It's just inevitable. So I think the question then is what to do about it. It's not an easy answer, but I think the moments that I've seen where someone transcends the effect of being in a large depersonalized system comes down to an individual moral formation. The little that I'm learning about CPE, clinical pastoral education for chaplains, I was, from what I've seen, I would summarize it as, kind of get over yourself. Some of the most toxic behaviors I've seen, interpersonal relationships are really just from people having their own unresolved issues that are just forced on to other people. For any individual worried about this kind of structural, depersonalization issue, the question is, well, what are you going to do about it? And how can I be a perpetrator in that kind of system? And I think that the answer is your own formation and getting over your own issues. Sorry about the we had a guest leaving. So
someone wants to join in.
That's right. Yeah. All right, everybody. That's a good place to pause our conversation for now. In the second half, we're going to turn directly to the role of technology, especially AI, and ask, can AI meaningfully help with the work of human connection? When is it better than nothing? When is it even better than human? When does it erode our capacity for belonging? We're also going to explore Lewis's work at the Vatican and what he calls the irreducible encounter principle, and see what Lewis and Allison think we might be able to safeguard through policy decisions. See you next time.